All right, so we'll get started this morning. It was nice of all of you guys to be here again for a second day. And we're going to do a little bit of a review of that just for a second. But before we do, today's topic is on reading and writing. And so yesterday, when we were talking about speaking, we were talking about the producing of language. And when we were talking about listening, we were talking about the receiving of language. And then today, when we're talking about reading, we're talking about the receiving of language as you look at the words on the page. And then the writing is the producing of language on paper. Okay? But what else comes to mind for you if you're thinking, I'm going to learn something about reading and writing? Are you thinking, my kids nowhere even close to being able to read and write? How is this going to apply to me? What kinds of thoughts are going through your head about the concept of learning something today that's helpful about reading and writing? What are you thinking?
Can you make better the way he writes?
Okay, so not just about the words themselves, but the handwriting. Okay, so that definitely is a concept related to this, yeah?
I guess we're at the stage where I'm just reading because he's 2. And
Yeah.
so I guess just continuing that, and then hopefully he'll start to associate some of the words and have them be sight words. I guess.
Yeah. So you use a term that comes up in school debates all the time. She says sight words. So we'll get into that a little bit later. Sometimes they're the death of parents, and sometimes they're the death of kids. And then other times kids just pick them up like that just because they see the McDonald's sign and bam, McDonald's, I know this one. So we're talking today about the process of reading and writing. I'm going to try and give you an awareness. I know there's a few of you who either homeschool or plan on homeschooling, or maybe in the future that's an option for you, but also just knowing what it is that your kids' teachers are doing in the classroom so that you have an awareness of the reading process. So we're going to talk through some vocabulary related to the reading process. Then we're also going to be talking about how to build that interest in reading and writing. So yesterday we did some with those specific strategies, but then we also talked about the heart of the matter with listening and speaking. And so we'll do a little bit of both of those today, because the main thing that you can take away from this, if your kids are nowhere close to being able to read a word on a page yet, is that mindset of how can I make reading seem important and how can I make reading seem enjoyable. So those are the two main focus items that you can keep and drives the decisions you make on a daily basis. So as I mentioned a moment ago, these are like the technical terms or whatever. So we have receptive language, what you're receiving, and so that's listening to information, processing it, reading information and processing it. And then expressive language is what you're producing, and so that's with the speaking and the writing. So keep that in mind when you know that your kid is nowhere near reading words yet, or even if they are reading words, you can continue to build their understanding of the world and build that foundation for reading the more that they practice listening to the things that you say or the things you point them towards, like certain movies or television programming or websites or any of that kind of thing. And the same with speaking. The more that they're practicing speaking and the more that you're modeling good speech for them, the stronger of a foundation they're going to have for writing later. So if your kid's nowhere near reading and writing yet, still consider this through the lens of speaking and listening. And it all connects. It's all related to literacy. So important, okay? Here are the important terms related to reading instruction. This is the terminology that teachers use in their preparation courses, and I just want you to be aware of what these terms mean. I made your notes to where you don't need to write these things for now, but phonemic awareness, that word phoneme means sound. We have a green shirt. I think they were coming in for their activity and he wandered in. So phoneme is sound, so the awareness of sound. So if you're phonemically aware, that means you understand how words words are put together with individual sounds. We'll go into more details of how you can support that skill in a little bit. We'll go into more detail of all of these, how to support these skills in a little bit. Phonics, you've heard that word before. Phonics is not just about the sound, but it's how the sound corresponds to the letters. So k is a C or k is a K, right? In our English phonics. Fluency means how well you can read with the right speed, accurately pronouncing the words, and using good expression. So that's fluency. And vocabulary, we spent quite a lot of time yesterday talking about oral vocabulary with speaking and listening. But vocabulary is what words mean. And if kids don't know what words mean as they're reading them, or if they're not taking the time to think about what words mean as they're reading them and they just rush, some kids can be fluent in reading without comprehending the meaning of the words. So then that's the next one, is comprehension, is understanding what you read. So in order to understand what you read, one, you have to be able to read it at a speed that makes sense, that your brain can process it. If you're just going, the, boy, went, to. If you're reading at that pace, in the very beginning, that's how it's going to be. But if you continue to read in that pace over the years, you're going to lose the meaning of the words, and that means that you're not going to be able to understand what you're reading. So that's why fluency is important to help with the comprehension piece. Fiction stories, poems, books. Fiction means what's make-believe. Now, fiction can be real-life things, it's just that it came from the imagination of the author. So we've heard of, like, Little House on the Prairie type stuff. It's fiction, even though it's based on historical, real events. So that is how we define fiction, whereas nonfiction is going to be where everything in it is factual, true, and unbiased, and all of that. Now, when we think about phonics, phonics is the breaking up of individual sounds. And you brought up the word sight words earlier. A sight word is a word that doesn't match the normal rules of English. And so if it doesn't make sense with the typical rules, then that is usually why we choose it as a sight word. Or if it's they use the term high frequency, meaning appearing very often, like the colors. Yeah, colors, numbers, all those. You want that automaticity very early on because those words appear in very young children's books very often. So because of that, that's why we put those words on a list. Your teachers may give them out in kindergarten and first grade. They call them like Dolch sight words or something like that. Dolch was a guy that created this list and thought, this is the best list ever, and here, everyone needs to learn these words. But most of the time, the reason a word gets on that list is because it's used very regularly, or it's not a word that you can memorize a rule for and pronounce correctly. Like the word have, if we think about most words, is not the sound that's made when an E is at the end of the word. Usually, if we looked at it, the rule would be have, but we don't say have. We say behave in the longer word with that extra syllable, but because have doesn't fit the rule of the long E, or the silent E makes the long vowel sound, that's why we put have on a list, like a Dolch sight word list. Yeah. It's tough. So for phonemic awareness, when you want to focus on making students or kids aware of how the sounds work, remember that when they're very young, or if they're struggling with this skill even after they're 5 years old, if they don't understand that words contain sounds, that's a skill you can help them practice. So you can break words apart. Dog, d, g. You can break apart the sounds. You can practice by putting sounds together. Maybe you can say a sound and then say the rest of the word and see if they can blend it all together. Now, if you try this with a 3-year-old, you're like, this is so easy. Why aren't they doing it right? They're not hearing the sounds yet. And they're not understanding that words have those individual sound separations. And it's just something that has to develop on its own. You can foster it, but until it clicks, it doesn't click.
Does it take a long time for them to if I'm like, S, what letter is this?
Yes, it can take a very long time for them to remember the letters. And then when you tell them they have to remember the letters, then you also have to tell them that those letters aren't usually named, but when they get to reading, now they're used to make sounds. So honestly, sometimes certain preschool models don't even teach letter names. Some preschool models choose to only teach the letter sounds. There's a curriculum, I think it's called Alpha Phonics or Animal Phonics, Animal Bits. I don't remember now, I've forgotten. But it's where each of the sounds corresponds with the sound of an animal. Zoophonics, that's it. Zoophonics. I knew it would come to me. Yeah, but that one, they only teach the letter sounds, and they say their philosophy is the kids are going to figure out the letter names naturally later, but the real important part is for them to know the sounds. Yeah, so they don't even focus on the names. So yeah, you can break apart words. So you can go park, and then see if they can blend that all together. Spark. Another way is if you are playing, like we talked about yesterday with games in the car, you can say a word, and then you can ask them to take off either a beginning sound or an ending sound. Or as they get older, you can say, try and replace the "a" with an "I" or something like that. So in this case, I have smile. What's smile without the "s"? Now don't say what's smile without the "s." If you're wanting them to think about sounds, don't say "s." So if you notice in my notes, anytime that there's those dashes or those backslash, that symbol is telling you that just means sound instead of letter name. So in all my textbooks and stuff, they put those little backslashes in between the letters like that. So smile, so you'd say, what's smile without the "s"? And you ponder it for a little bit. And then maybe you could say, smile, smile, smile. And you're just teaching them that there's different little parts here and there. And so them understanding that you can break apart sounds, you can put sounds together, and that you can remove sounds, all of those different awareness activities can foster that development of understanding the sound-letter correspondence, which is the next step of phonics. So this would be the step that is seeming to be the most important, but honestly, if they don't understand that phoneme issue in the first step, phonics isn't really going to matter. But practicing the letter naming is usually the most important element that people think of. Oh, if my kid's going to learn to read, they need to know the letter names. More than that, what do they need to know? The sounds. But in order to read, they do now need to know the symbol of that letter and what it represents. Yesterday we talked a little bit about rhyming. There's nursery rhymes, there's different poems, there's just opportunity for you to go hat, cat, rat, fat, sat, and you can just name them all off. And just helping them to hear that, or reading Dr. Seuss books that are super silly but have endings that rhyme. And lots of children's books have endings that rhyme. But anytime that you can help them have that awareness of what all those words have in common, they all sound the same at the end, or sit there and list off a bunch of words that have the same sound at the beginning. Silly, Susan, simple, smile, and they're hearing all those, they're starting to build those connections for themselves, because a lot of times we think, teachers think this, parents think this, the control issue. We talked about control a little bit yesterday with how we can want them to give in to the societal norms, but that sometimes is a fight. You've got to wear your shoes in the store and all that. But the same is true with the reading process. We cannot just force them to remember what an S looks like. It's not going to happen. But those opportunities that we can build that awareness for them, offer them opportunities to make the connections in their own brain, then it will stick. That may take a while. You may feel like you're more in control if you keep shoving that flashcard in their face, but you're really not in control when you're shoving that flashcard in their face if they're not receptive to that instruction.
At what age do you think the average that they become aware
that you can start now. You can start that now. He's not going to be proficient now.
Right.
He's not going to be doing it perfectly, but he might start to pick up on some of them.
Have general
Oh yeah.
awareness.
Oh yeah, definitely. Even, like you breaking apart, smile, smile. Say it with me. Smile, smile, and then do it.
Okay.
You can even show him the word if you want. It's not going to hurt at all for him to be aware that words match up with sounds and sounds split apart to make other words.
I didn't know if there was a general age that kids became aware.
They start to become more aware of it on average by 3.
Okay.
Aware, not
Right.
fluent at it, not good at it, but they can start to understand it a lot better around 3. If they're not understanding that sounds are in words, even if they don't know, let's not talk about letters. We're not talking about letters at all. If they come to kindergarten with an awareness of how words work, we're not talking about letters, we're talking about how they hear them, and if they're aware, like, the is its own word when I say, the boy was mean to me. You know, if they can, and it's hard to measure this. You don't know if they know. You really don't know if they know, unless you practice some of these activities. But like, if they can't really understand that their words matter and that their words are connected to other words to build these, if they're just not aware, we call that metacognition, so being aware of your own thinking. Yeah, so if you're not aware of your own thinking when you get to kindergarten and now they're forcing books in front of you, then that's going to make it very challenging for them to start to read. So anytime you can help them make those connections by being intentional with these little activities like smile, smile, silly, silly, that it just builds the awareness for them, and then that gives them some of that foundation to apply this learning to new learning later. And so, like I said, I wasn't even talking about the letters. Just the sounds. If they can understand that sounds and words are not the exact same thing, and if they can understand that words make up sentences and those types of things, if that's just something they're starting to become aware of before they get to kindergarten in verbal conversation, then that's when that sweet spot is for them to be receptive to learning the reading process. Yep. So understanding first what these sounds are is important. But then we can focus on the rhyming words, the words with the same beginning sound. And then the words with the letter, not the words with the letter, the sounds with the letters, you can start to introduce that, but not feel stressed if they're not getting those actual, this letter says, this letter says.
To do it, just, there is a game or anything that you can, this is the only way to do it, just give the sound, just speaking. Or is there any other techniques that you use to do that? And my daughter, she just turned 4. Like,
Yeah.
she recognizes all the letters, but she doesn't have that. Like, when you try the whole dog thing, like,
Right.
she don't have that conception.
No, and that's okay if she just turned 4.
Or
That's,
even
that's
for
fine.
reading her a book,
Yeah.
she's not interested in paying attention to the word. You know,
Right.
She just want to look at the images.
That's okay.
Or, you know, she's
Yeah,
looking at
no,
it.
and that's
She can
okay.
recognize
So
that.
part of that is modeling as you're reading that left to right motion. Just knowing that you move across the page from left to right. We start at the top left, we move to the right, we move down to also going back to the left, but down one line. Just that motion of knowing the left to right movement, the up to the bottom movement, all of those pieces of awareness build into the reading process. And yes, there are games. By game, though, it really is what you're willing to either buy or make or say. Because honestly, if you're just building in the sounds, there really isn't like a game except just that back and forth talking. Maybe you would make your own self some notes, like which sounds you want to try and keep in mind that week. Like we talked about yesterday, putting on your mirror those couple of cues of things to remember to try this week or next week. If you wanted to remember to really actively listen to your kids, some of you said you tried that last night, and that sort of thing. And that's the same with this. Do I want to focus on S and R this week? Okay, so I'm going to be aware out in my environment. Railroad. Do you hear that? Rail and road start with the same sound. Now all of a sudden they're realizing rail is a separate word from road.
And see, I never worked with the sound. This is awesome.
Yeah, so then, and then that can even build naturally. In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, now there's a connection. I can go back to that vocabulary piece. Road and street mean the same thing. So you could ask them, what's another word for road? If I was talking about the road where we drive our car, what could we say? We wouldn't have to call it a road. What could we call it? We could call it a street. We could call it a boulevard. And that builds in that embedded nature of reading where it all overlaps. You're moving from the sounds to the word meanings. You kind of just make it fluid. So it's really just about opening up your mind. You guys know all these skills. You know how words work because you're literate, you're grown, you get it. But helping them build those connections will just make school a more positive experience the more you can build that foundation early on. And as kids are struggling with learning how to read, and if they're older, these kinds of skills, this phonics and phonemic awareness, may be something that was taken for granted and they rushed through and they didn't get. And so if you have a kid who's 14 or 11 who's reading very poorly, they're figuring out some strategies to make it work in the classroom. They're barely scraping by with their C's or whatever, but they're getting through painfully. It could be that even one of those kinds of kids would need to go back and have some of this awareness built into their life too. So phonics gets a bad reputation sometimes. Some schools say, oh, we're not going to teach phonics. We're only going to teach sight words. No, we need a little bit of everything because there's no one method that's going to be perfect for every single person.
So are all schools, or you teach in Martin County?
I do.
Okay, do you know about St. Lucie County and how their system or their schools teach phonics or not?
I think it is a very blended approach in both districts. I think that they have realized that the whole language experience is important and that one method isn't going to work. They use something by a researcher and a developer named Lucy Calkins. And what that does is it focuses on an isolated reading strategy within 1 week. So the teacher will do what they call a mini lesson, so a short, quick lesson maybe at the carpet. They'll bring the little kids over to the carpet, or they'll do, this is also something you can purchase. You don't have to be a school teacher to do it. So if you wanted to use this type of model for a homeschool curriculum too. And so you focus on a strategy for that week. So if the strategy was going to be on thinking about cause and effect, in this story, let's think about what causes the boy to break his leg or whatever, kind of thing. So if that was one of the strategies they wanted kids to become aware of with their comprehension skills, for example, the teacher would talk about the importance of cause and effect. Maybe she'd have them turn and talk to partners, and then they would explain a time when maybe they got hurt or whatever to build that connection. Then she would teach specifically about the cause and effect, and all of this would take place in about 10 minutes. Then she would say, now go into your own books and begin to look and see if your story has one of these relationships in it and note it in your writing journal. So they kind of just envelop a skill at a time for the kids to pick their own stories, promote their own interests of the books, but try and find how those different skills and strategies can be used in their own independent reading. Then they all come back together at the end and share if they found some of those experiences. Meanwhile, the teacher's going around and conferencing one-on-one with about a third of the class every day. So every third day, your kid's getting that one-on-one time to check in with the teacher. Meanwhile, they're doing activities with their stories. So that's part of the reading block. So I know that that's one of the methods they use for teaching reading. I know they incorporate that from K through 5th. I don't know what it looks like in like K1 and early 2. I know what it looks like more in 3, 4, 5 because I work with middle school, so we focus more on what kids are doing from 3rd and up. I'm not as aware of what St. Lucie County and Martin County are doing in the very early grades. But they're looking at reading as the whole experience. Definitely, I do know that. And yes, they do explicitly teach them strategies. They also use a lot of computer-based programs for teaching those specific reading sounds to correspond with letters. And the reason they do that is for the same reasons I was just talking about earlier, that Kids just have to make those connections eventually. And if the teacher focuses the whole group on one skill, some people are left out if they've already learned it. So if they're on an adaptive computer program, it gets harder for the kids that are already advanced, and it gets lower for the kids that need that repeated instruction. Because we have a mom here with a 10-year-old who's probably reading and doesn't need any of this, and now she, so I'm missing the mark for her right now with this piece. But we'll get into some more things that are a little more focused. Good deal. Good deal. Good deal. Yeah. So that's why they use the computer programs to fill in some of those gaps too, just because one teacher can't meet the needs of all the kids at the exact same time. So they do use a lot of different technology. And I have websites at the end today, and then I'll be emailing you some other links that you can use anytime you want as well. A lot of them are free. Sometimes certain websites you do pay for, depending on how you want to go about that. So fluency, a lot of parents really worry. He just wants to keep reading The Very Hungry Caterpillar and worrying that that's a bad thing. It is not a bad thing. It is a very good thing, whether they're 14 or they're 8 months old. Repetition of books builds fluency. You reading as a model with good sound effects and voices is amazing, but probably out of some of your comfort zones. That's okay. You can use audiobooks for that instead. A lot of children's books have been read by famous people, and they're available on YouTube. Or maybe they're not read by a famous person, they're just read by ordinary Joe that decided to upload a video. Preview them first. But a lot of children's books are read online the way that, I don't know if you watched Reading Rainbow when you were younger, but how he would read the book and the pictures would be up on the screen. YouTube has a lot of people reading books where they put the pictures on the screen while they're reading it. So that opens up a whole new world of opportunity for you that you don't have to read the stories out loud. They may even have sound effects built in or music in the background. But obviously, as often as you can do the reading yourself, that is important, because the other piece that's important that we'll talk about later, and I already mentioned once, is that print awareness of going left to right. When your kid is 7, you don't really need to keep doing that anymore. But when your kid is not yet reading independently, anytime you can do that of moving your hand across while you read the words, that demonstrates to them what their eyes should be doing. And building that awareness of telling them why you're doing what you're doing. Don't just do it, We want them to know why you're doing what you're doing. Yeah. Mommy's feeling the words. And then later they're like, what? The page is smooth. Why is she doing that? Yeah. So, if things are purposeful, make sure that people know what your purpose is, right? Yeah. So, don't worry if your children, as they're beginning to read, are choosing books that seem too easy. If you have a kid who's 7 and he's picking up a book that you think is really more for a 5-year-old, don't panic. The times when they're reading books that seem too easy for them is the time when they're building fluency. Because remember, fluency means accuracy. You want to read the words correctly. If the book is very easy, they're building confidence of reading words accurately, quickly, okay? Also, you're wanting expression. So if the book is easier and they're not having to labor so much of pronouncing the words and sounding them out, then they're building that expression into their reading the more that they read books that are easier. So do not panic if they keep picking up books that they've read 10 times or that you think are too easy for them. That's okay. There's plenty of time for you to challenge them with other books. But when they're choosing books, it's okay if some of them are too easy, for sure.
Do you have a camera in your house?
A camera? No. Choral reading. So choral is like chorus, choir. What that means is if you have several kids in your home, or you and your spouse and your kid, you guys can all read together from the same passage. You could do this with the Bible. You could do this with a poem. It wouldn't be practical to do it with a picture book, unless at the library you can get 3 copies, because it's hard for everybody to like huddle around one picture book. But if it's something you could print off or read off of a screen or whatever. But as they're learning to read, or once they're more developed in reading, find passages that'll be a little bit challenging to your kid, and you read them with them. They're mostly going to repeat you half a second behind, kind of like you do if you're in a, you have to go to like a wedding service at a church that you're not familiar with, and then you're like, oh, I'm going to follow what they're saying or whatever. Or people are singing a song and you don't know it, so you're just the word behind, right? So they're going to do that skill just like you do when you're uncomfortable and unaware of what's going on. But that's a good thing. So you read it through once, and they're listening. Then you get to the second verse, right? And then you get a little more comfortable, right? That's going to be the same way for the kid. So if you read through a tisket, a tasket, a green and yellow basket, or whatever, the second time through, they're going to know more than just the words green and yellow, right? They're going to remember that basket was the last word probably, so they're going to get that one. So that's a third word that they're getting right. Then maybe the next time through, they'll remember tisket because it rhymed with basket, tisket and tasket, or whatever. So that doesn't rhyme. I did not mean that. So anyway, they're going to pick up on different words each time. And so because of that, that builds fluency. I'll get into this warning later. It's already written down. You don't have to write it now. But don't belabor it to the point where they get annoyed, okay? So do it 4 or 5 times. If that is too much, don't do it that many times. Feel them out. Because your main goal, from what I said before, your main goal is for them to build that awareness that reading is important and writing is important, and building the awareness that it's pleasurable or it's enjoyable. So if you start to do something that makes it unenjoyable, abort mission. Because it's not worth your relationship being strained just to get through reading that passage one more time. So use your own discernment as your parenting style allows for how often you push it and how often you pull back.
Is there any way to motivate them if they used to read, and out of nowhere they don't want to read?
Yes, we'll get there. We will. Mirrored reading is where you read something first and then your kid reads it after you. So you read a whole page of a story, then they go back and they read that page of the story. Or you do it one sentence at a time. That way they're hearing it the first time. So a lot of the words are memory words, short-term memory words. So they're not getting them stored permanently in their long-term memory every time. But a few of them might stick, and they're building that fluency. They're hearing what the expression sounded like from what you said. The sleepy mother finally laid down for the night. You kind of go up, and then you come back down. And then they read it through. The sleepy mother. And they couldn't remember what the other words were because they just remember that part. But then you can do it one more time, and then they do it one more time. And that's something you can start as early as 3. Obviously, they're not going to read the words. It's more about the memory, but you're still moving your finger across. They're moving their finger across. Maybe they're not saying them at the moment their finger is under that specific word, but they're getting the habit. They're getting the habit. So when you read something more than once, you're eliminating that choppiness of trying to sound out the words. And that's why I'm talking about reading things more than one time, is to build that fluency or that fluidity with making single words into phrases. When you listen to your kids read, we talked about yesterday with grammar and pronunciation, that it's not always worth it to pick every battle with the mispronunciations and the poor grammar choices. The same is true when they're reading and you're listening to them. You could make a note of the mistakes they're making and maybe find a way to incorporate those words into something else later. You could just let it go. It's all right. If they say it instead of in, as they're reading through a story, that's probably not going to change the meaning of that book very much. If they say umbrella instead of umpire, well, that's probably going to matter, right? So they get to the end of the page, and they said umbrella instead of umpire in a book about baseball. And you might then ask them a question. Do you see that word with a U? I heard you say umbrella. What is this story about? It's about a boy playing baseball, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, I know that unless it's raining, you don't really need an umbrella. And even when it's raining, I've never seen a baseball player use an umbrella. Can you think of another word that starts with U that might match this one better? So asking them to think through to self-correct and after the fact is often a better way for you to build your relationship with the child than immediately stopping them and correcting them. The umbrella went up to the batter. No, go back. If you do it like that, that becomes frustrating, right? And that puts a rift in the relationship. But if you build the experience later, then hopefully they'll make those connections and they'll feel that it's in love a little bit better than if you just go with a buzzer, right? We don't want to just overcorrect every single word.
Would you potentially have them, like, so say they finish the page or whatever, would you ever have the approach of pointing to the word at the end and just saying, what was this again?
Yeah, and see if they self-correct.
And maybe like they just read it quickly.
Yep. Yep. And a lot of times kids will self-correct anyway, even if they do it mentally and they don't say it out loud. And so we don't want to always just judge that. But building in that context and support of awareness of that pictures matter, context in the story matters. But you're right, having them, that might even be the first approach that's better than what I said about the umbrella business. But seeing if they even just notice the second time through. And so if you're, just depending on how you're incorporating all of this into your daily life and with homeschool or not or whatever, but like if you want to keep that log of those words that they're missing, then you can make them, I've got games and stuff, you can put those words into the game somehow. If you're if you decide with writing, take one of the strategies I recommend with keeping a journal, going back and forth, writing to your kids, where they write you a message, you write them a message, keep like a composition book or whatever. Then if you're keeping a list of words you know they've mispronounced or that they've miswritten in other things, find ways to incorporate those words in your writing back to them. And so just building in that awareness where you notice when they miss something, now you give them more opportunities to practice that thing that they missed, then that's a good way to try too. The same would be true from what we talked about yesterday with just using new vocabulary. Okay, so I pointed out spectacles while we're walking through the park yesterday. Well, then now today, I'm going to try and find another way to use it. I'm glad I don't have to have spectacles to see when I'm watching TV. My eyesight's clear. You know, come up with another situation to use the word. So the more often that you can embed any of those ways of correcting them nonchalantly, that will definitely help. And these aren't necessarily the same types of strategies that I would give in a workshop to a teacher. Your relationship with your child is lifelong. It's something very important and precious for you to maintain. And even if they're not going to remember that you went to them when they're 9, and you did it when they were 5, that is going to somehow leave an imprint on their heart, right? And so that puts a lot of pressure on us. Ooh, 5 minutes was enough. Aw. So we don't really understand the psychology of memory and how we, transfer our baggage day to day. We cannot be perfect when we relate to people on a daily basis, especially when you're tired and they're bugging you, right? But as much as we can keep things positive with regard to correcting them, the more that they're going to be receptive to your criticism when it really matters and when it's really needed. Yeah. And I say criticism, we do. Sometimes we need to strongly correct, but you need to pick the battles that matter the most, and them saying umbrella instead of umpire is not one of those to, fight over. So with vocabulary, yesterday we talked a lot about using vocabulary in context, and another fun way that you can And after I get through these first couple slides, I'm going to explain the games that I've printed today. You can come up and get them, and then you can cut and glue and everything while I continue to talk the rest of the time. But one thing that you could work on if you don't want to work on one of my games would be writing out with a marker and cutting. I brought colored paper out today. You could cut like index card size or business card size little labels to stick around your house if you want to. Make it look like a preschool if you really are ready and interested in labeling stuff. I recommend painter's tape so that it doesn't damage your furniture when it's time to take it off. But if you want to go around and label things around your house, garbage can, front door, back door, garage, whatever, Martin's trains, whatever, like, yeah. Anything you can label around the house, that gives them that print environment where they're building that awareness of what words are. You never even have to point to those words if you don't want to. You can.
And in my house, I'm trying to speak Portuguese with it, because that's my second language.
You can put both.
I've been doing both. Like,
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. The other thing that I want to warn you about, and make yourself a note of this, when you go to write those words on the labels, our tendency, because of autocorrect, is that the first line of everything is always capitalized. Do not capitalize those words when you write them today. So refrigerator does not need a capital R. If you're going to write refrigerator, either do all capital letters or do all lowercase letters. But do not capitalize the R in refrigerator, because I work at IRSC and I look over college students' papers and they capitalize the most random words, and if I can help the next generation to know when to capitalize words, I'm going to put out a PSA right now.
And that's probably not
Yeah. I'm so happy today. No, happy does not need to be capitalized, but I want to emphasize it. Then use italics.
With an exclamation point in the middle.
Yeah. So we want to be careful of how we use our capital letters. We want to be, are they in the wrong order? Did they get stapled wrong? Oh, okay. So, like we talked about yesterday, helping kids be aware that when words are used in a story and they don't know what they mean, looking at the pictures to help figure out what that unknown word means. That strategy does not always work. A lot of times it doesn't work. Looking at sentences around that word to try and figure out what that word means. And then even helping your kid keep their own journal and their own awareness of accountability and being honest and reflective with themselves. I was reading this today. Mom wasn't available. I couldn't go ask her. But I know I don't know this word. And if they start taking ownership of their own understanding, that is where you're holding their hearts towards being productive later and being really studious, is if they can start to take that ownership of their learning as early as possible and their own awareness of their own faults and mistakes, that is where they become really productive in school and in life. Obviously, you're not going to give a 3-year-old a dictionary, but helping them understand that a dictionary is a tool for finding a new word. We talked about yesterday asking the pet shop owner for information about guinea pigs instead of the parent just being that professional source of information for everything. You don't have to play the expert. Make sure your kid's aware of the resources and the references that are available out in the world for them. Whether that means you're going to dictionary.com or you have a Webster's Dictionary on your shelf. Letting them know that there's resources where you can go to look things up for them. And then when they're ready, they can start to take that own initiative for that. Synonyms are really important. You can practice those, like I said earlier, with street and road, just helping them be aware that there's more than one word to say things a lot of times. Also with vocabulary, a fun thing that you could come up with, especially with like temperature words, you can do it with other words too, but especially with temperature words, as they get older, you can think of how to rank them. Frigid to boiling, right? And anything in between. Hot is not just hot. There are many words that can explain hot, and some are more drastic than others, right? We have warm, we have lukewarm, and all those different kinds of phrases. Think of any word you can to describe how something is measured in temperature. And see if the kids can come up with them. You can write them on little pieces of paper and then sit there and try and get them in the right order. And you can have a little fun argument about it. I'm thinking more like at 7 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old for this one. But you can put words in rank order and see if you can negotiate. No, I think frigid goes here. Oh, I think that arid goes here. That's like hot and dry and whatever kind of thing. So there's no right answer to them. It's just good for conversation and getting them to think. And if there's one that someone comes up with that someone else doesn't know the meaning of, you can always go to the dictionary and you can look it up and see. I went the wrong way. Comprehension, like I said before, we said yesterday, avoid one-word answers. Try and ask follow-up questions to go deeper. We were doing that with conversational skills yesterday, but remember to do that while you're reading books too. So you can do it while kids are watching movies and TV. You can also do it while you're reading a book with them. You're asking questions that start with who, what, when, where, why, how, tell me more, all those kinds of elaborative phrases to get them to say more than just yes or no, say more than just he was sleepy. Try and come up with a why and elaborate. Another great thing to try is to get kids to ask you questions. I'm going to tell you, if you tell a kid to ask you a question and they haven't practiced knowing that they know how to ask questions, that's that awareness thing we were talking about earlier. Kids ask questions all day long. They don't know. They're not aware that they're asking questions. So when you say, can you ask me a question about this page? They're just going to stare at you. Yeah. So if that's your strategy, okay. But the main thing to think about is helping them be aware that you're asking a question. I'm going to ask you a question now. I'm going to start it with the word what. What just happened to Johnny? And then they'll answer you. Johnny went to the park. Okay, great. Now, can you ask me a question? I said, what is Johnny doing? Can you ask me a question about where he is? So you've given her most of the words she needs to ask you a question. You've modeled it. Now you're seeing if she can ask you a question of where. Now she's going to say, where is Johnny? Great. It's very a basic question, but it's understanding that concept of, oh, I can ask a question. Well, I ask questions all the time. They start to become aware of their own skills when you do that. Anytime that you can read a book that has a movie or a TV show based on it, not only does that build comprehension because you can do comparing and contrasting activities to talk about similarities and differences, but for struggling readers or kids who are disinterested in reading, what you can do is you can build that interest a little bit more. And especially for a kid who doesn't like to read, sometimes you might even want them to watch the movie first. Then they have the visual image of the movie tied in with the book. And I'll tell you, the movie that matches the book the best of any I've seen is Holes. So has your son read Holes or watched it? Yeah. It is almost identical to the book. I have not seen another movie that is as accurate as that one. The difference is Shia LaBeouf is not heavy, and in the book, the main character is a heavy kid, and they give out cookies instead of graham crackers or something. I couldn't find a lot of things that were that different, so it's kind of fun. So, reading materials. What constitutes a reading material? If you want your kids to read, and you want your kids to see you reading, what is a reading material? Name them. Newspaper. Magazine. A book. A phone. What on the phone? Articles. Facebook status. No, seriously, it's all reading. What else?
Instagram captions.
What?
Instagram captions.
Okay, Instagram.
Labels.
What else?
Say road signs.
Road signs. What else? Okay, you can spot things in the car. Yeah.
In the grocery store.
Grocery store, reading labels, reading signs, reading the receipt afterwards, making a shopping list. Menus at a restaurant. Cookbooks. Can you think of one? What can you read?
Did you ask my question?
Yeah. What can you read? Can you read that letter on your screen? Okay, let's see. So just remember that our definition of reading is much more vast than just opening a book. Kids often say, I can't find a book. You know, I can't find a book. You know, there are so many things to read. A book doesn't have to be a chapter book to be a book for an 8-year-old. A book or a reading material could be a graphic novel. It can be a Guinness Book of World Records with tons of pictures in it. It can be a magazine. It does not have to be a physical book. They don't have to read Great Expectations. Like, they can be reading Diary of a Wimpy Kid. It's still reading. Yeah? Yeah, they love that. So anything in the community is something you can read, correct? You're even reading a stop sign. It's just one word. You're even reading a traffic light because the symbols of the colors are still reading because you're processing visual information, okay? So change your mindset of what reading is, and you can start making your kids aware of ways they already know how to read. If they build that confidence of knowing how to read, that's going to build in the interest in wanting to understand how words work later. There are a lot of different interactive websites that you can go to where you can explore topics with your kid, where there are lots of video support, picture support to go along with the text, and you can explore some of those things together. One of them is called Wonderopolis. I have the link at the end. It's put together by Toyota. Have you seen it? Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'll send it, and then it's also written in here too. So yeah, I'll email those out. Because a lot of these, it's hard to, like, here's a PDF. Copy down this H479.pdf. Yeah, like, no. I'll email you all of them. So a book is not just a book. It can be a magazine. You can even read baseball cards, Pokemon cards, T-shirts. Yeah, there's so many things you can read. So before we move into the importance of reading and the love of reading, where we're going to transition to the heart issues and making this relevant, I'm going to talk through some of the activities I brought today so that you can come up here, grab some, get another coffee, and then we'll continue with our second half. This I've made, you don't have to take a whole set of these, you can, there are 4 of them. This is something you can make more of later if you want to. You could also, you can make the pictures more difficult, you can make more strips, you could change up how you do it. But the way that something like this would work is for students, kids to check their work by noticing how the picture lines up. But what you would do, the way these were made, and I used a whiteout to take them off, it was just numbers 1 through 10 or whatever it was. But what you could do, if your kids are older and they're understanding alphabetizing words, you could put random words on these, like bake, simple, Matthew, whatever, and then get them to put them in alphabetical order and line them up. So you would have to make sure you write them in alphabetical order, or else they wouldn't make sense when they put them back together. Or you could practice skip counting, okay? If your kids are older and you need to practice counting by tens, you could start with 50, even if you wanted to. 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, something like that. If you wanted to try one where you write just letters from the alphabet, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, and then they have to go in order, but not starting at the beginning. Because that's another awareness thing that kids need to understand about numbers and letters if they're going in order, is knowing that you don't always have to start at 1 to count. And so we're not going into numbers a whole lot today, but that is part of literacy, is understanding how numbers work. And then for this one, maybe you could... maybe you could also write like the process of something if you wanted to, like not necessarily on these because it's kind of smaller, but you could put together strips on a smaller paper at your own time. But you could write like steps in a series. Like if you read a book, you guys could write together what happened in the story and then have them go back and try and put them in order. So like sequencing the story. Yeah, you could even label things that are in this coloring book picture too, yeah. But the main thing, the reason I printed it, my thought was just, you could cut it and put it back together as a self-check puzzle. Yeah. So when you cut the strips later, so after you've colored it and you've cut the strips, then all these would line up in the right order to go A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
Yeah, I was wondering what that was.
Oh, sorry, I didn't explain it very well. All right, so here's another file folder game where you will glue these two down on one of the folders, and these 3 spaces correspond to the word, the picture that's next to it. So here we have, I don't know. What is it supposed to spell? Let's see here. Boot?
Not enough space.
Well, I don't. Oh, okay. This is very confusing. I was trying to find, because I'd used a lot of color ink, and I was trying to find something that was black and white today. But like, okay. So even though there's a boot here, it's really the cat, C-A-T. And then here's a map, M-A-P. So these are very simple words to spell. I was like, boot? We can't.
Any of those words.
Yeah. So there's one for, what we call those is CVC words, which means consonant, vowel, consonant. So C is a consonant, T is a consonant, A is a vowel. So these are for very basic spelling words. This one is where you would match up the ice cream cone top to the ice cream cone bottom to correspond capitals with lowercase letters. And so what you do is color all the cones brown or yellow or whatever, glue them all onto the board. Make sure that before you glue them on, you would have also positioned all the tops so that they don't overlap in a certain way. I'm going to come stand closer to them. Will you take a picture of us closer here? Okay, no. Oh, yeah, you're paying attention to me. Watch me. You watch me. And we're looking at letter A and E. Interesting, huh? Are you good? Okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay, thanks. So my recommendation would be get everything cut out before you glue anything down. Then that way you know that you didn't overlap the bottom of the A on top of the D or whatever when you lay them on there. But once you cut them all out, color them or whatever, then the kids are going to match up the capitals to the lowercase. And you can glue those into the file folder too. Yesterday, if you didn't take any of these, there's still some of these question cards. You can take more of those. If you didn't get one of the 5 senses yesterday, I made a few more of those. There's still some more of these pictures where this is a prompt for writing, but it's also a prompt for speaking. I mean, there's tons, well, not anymore as many, but different scenarios. This is really just a reminder to you. If you just take one of these, you don't have to take a bunch of them if you don't want to. This would be a reminder to you to find pictures to get kids to talk about. Reading isn't just about reading. It's about telling a story, too, to come up with something new. So when I told you earlier that learning to write, the foundation to that is speaking well. If your kid can't write yet, they can tell you a story about this group of kids playing with a ball. And that, of them telling the story, you writing what they say word for word, that's a great opportunity for them to feel like a writer. If your kids are already writing and they have spelling lists at school, this is a battleship game. So what you can do is you write the spelling words the way you put ships on for battleships. So you turn them up and down, left to right. and then the other person's quizzing you on the, like, I7, miss, I4, hit, or whatever. And so you play it just like regular Battleship, but instead of putting ships on here, you're writing sight words or words from their spelling list. And so got preoccupied and I didn't go get any, but sheet protectors inside of this, then it could be reusable. So everybody can take one of those. Another way you can play sight words would be building a chutes and ladders type board or something. You would cut the bottom of that one off and then glue it on. But you could write sight words on each of the spaces so that whatever they roll and they land on, then they need to read that word, and then you're just playing a regular chutes and ladders game. So much of making learning into a game is just repurposing other games and pretending like you're playing a game, but really you're just reading words. So that's a bunch of lies that we can do. And the same is true with this one. So it's just a board, and you can color it to look like Candyland or whatever. You would cut along here so that they line up side by side. But you move along, and then when you finish your turn and you're on the 6th space in the front, then you just pick up a card, read it, ask the kid a question. Okay, now it's my turn. I mean, there's no winning and losing. It's just you answer a question every time you roll. You could just ask the questions. You don't have to move the pieces around the board, but the board piece makes the kid feel like it's a game, and it makes it more engaging. Psychologically, hopefully not damaging.
Do you have a list of the sight words?
I can email that. Yeah. And it's divided out by grade level. And it's arbitrary list that I'll find online. I don't know what your school district actually uses for sure, but a list is a list. If they need every word, right? Eventually, they need them all. If you didn't take any of these question cards yesterday, there's still more of these with different family discussions. And then this one is accounting fluency, where got some little sailors here, and there's a number missing in the middle, 11 blank 13, so they'd do 12. What you would do is glue down the sailors on the board, and then you would cut out the individual life preservers. You could color them, and so then we'd look for the 13, right? And that would be placed on top of the sailor that had that. Oh, maybe it was 12. What was I reading? Oh, 12. Yeah, not 13, 12. So there's 12. So you would just lay it on top of. You wouldn't glue them down. You would just place them down, and then that way they could play it again another time. So anything that you take where you cut it out today or take them for later, you can have a Ziploc bag to store them in. The other way to store them would just be with a paper clip if you don't want to use a baggie. But all these different games, you're welcome to take any and all of them. If you took one of this one yesterday, leave that for someone else who didn't get one of that kind. But anything else you're welcome to take. So we'll take 5 minutes. If you want to grab supplies, you can cut and color and all of that while I talk for the remainder of the time. But yeah, grab some junk if you want it. More food, more coffee, more handouts. Yeah. And somebody left their folder yesterday. I don't know. You can look through and see if it's yours.
Thank you.
Was that yours? Oh, good.
I introduce you guys, but this is This is Casey. Nice to meet you. This is Lana from Brittany.
Hi, he's right here drawing. The other one. I've been trying to do a little bit.
She might have been at your house.
Yeah.
So much that
Yeah, that's right. Not like this. Oh, yeah.
yeah.
So right now I'm just working on like
there
the
too.
bodies.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have senses. No,
Okay, good. Well, I'll send an email with lots of the resources. Probably by the end of the weekend. I'm going to be honest. It won't be.
you probably need more than one.
I got to get down to my middle school this afternoon. Yeah. Okay, so I'll send those things out hopefully by the end of the weekend. Nice to meet you. Argan, yeah. I hadn't met you before. Holy, long ago. Yeah.
All right, bye.
I do. Well,
Like all this is, I'm a classroom teacher. Oh my gosh, like I remember everything you're saying.
It's hard though, trying to like say things that are relatable to the parents. Like, okay, it's not all about the same that you would do in the classroom. I was like, but I still wanted to introduce those terms with fluency and vocabulary. Because if teachers, you go into a parent-teacher conference, they're going to use those terms.
Think about that. It's like, it's so north for you.
Yeah. Okay.
How many different sheets? I know.
I think it's full up. I think it's two.
Oh, no, I don't have this one. There's
Oh, yeah.
at least three. Four. Oh, you know what? I think they're in order. Oh, yeah. Look, they're in order.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you just take one of the set.
Yeah, I did it wrong. But you?
I thought they were
Good.
separate. They were
A
different.
few years now. Yeah.
And one of them should have.
Oh, great. Where do you teach? Oh, okay. That's right. That's right. The VIP.
They did that. What? They took the cat.
Yeah. Well, and for them, you have to come up with quick rewards, right?
Matters.
So holding up some of these things. The battleship one, maybe they could play ongoing. Yeah. Oh, the battleship. It's like you set it up like a crossword puzzle where you write the words on the battleship.
My thing is like at this point, I feel like I have a lot
And
I've
then they
already working out
quiz
with
you and they're like,
F7 or whatever.
like
Like I was telling her,
like hit or miss.
they're going to throw so much at him that like when it starts, I'm not going to do any of this.
Did you ever play battleship?
He's going to be so strange.
Where you lay out the little ships? You lay out
Like
the
at 3
ships
o'clock,
on the
he's probably
grid.
going to pass out in the car for the first like month because he's going to be so exhausted. So really, in the next
Oh, and she just put it up
I
on the,
probably
she
won't
put
even get
on the
around to some of this
battleship up
because
on
I
the,
have so much other stuff. They've
up
been working
on
on
your,
phonics.
don't you have to like put stuff behind you? Like, well, if that was up there, and then they
That's
could
kind of
tell
what
you
we've been
which,
working on.
and you, maybe you did it
Because I feel like
laminated
he
so
can't
that you
do
could wipe it
sight
off later.
words.
But every time every checkpoint when they do a good job, then they could guess a letter combination, so they could go F6,
Kinda
and
messed
then
him
you've
up.
got the answers down here, and you're like, oh, that's
She was
a miss,
pushing
and you
aside
put
where
an
you
X
could
on
get
it. But if they get a hit, then you
And
can
if
put
he
a
doesn't
smiley
know
face
the
in that.
word, let alone
The sound of the letter.
sound,
Like, how is he gonna know where's
Yeah.
the length?
yes, like he does not know what it means. Well, he knows H, he doesn't know.
Well, you wouldn't necessarily have to have sight words on it. So I was just thinking of battleship, that could be your incentive.
She said like you just go like
I know
you
when
know
they
with the dice and go
sometimes it's hard
under
to
and
come up with
over
incentives because you can't physically give them
read a word or
anything.
whatever.
But that might feel rewarding.
You know what I mean? You can do it like your own. Like if you stop here, you gotta read those words.
Oh, you did the
That's
same
what I'll
program?
do. Write a few words in it.
Like, were they breeding other words at all? Like, sounding out like cat and that.
There
that,
were
it.
some kids who could do it, but I
Some
still
kids, you know, but
Yeah, I was thinking
that's
tic tac
the
toe. This is like tic tac toe on steroids, like playing battleship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you know when
And
she
you
was
don't have to
talking
call
in
it
the beginning,
battleship. You
she's
could
like
just say
talking about the
missing
phonics
ship.
part.
I don't
They
know.
really pushed sight words more than phonics last year.
Special.
actually. That's
It could
crazy.
be like a Smarties candy
not-
on there.
I know.
Like
It's
you
not
find out the
kindergarten,
hard
like, come on.
They're long candy.
That's
They
the
may not
thing.
have that candy.
People have these expectations that they set so high, and then kids feel like failures.
Yeah.
Find the candy, find the ship, find the... Oh, a magic wand. And so you could just Velcro all the spaces on yours and then turn it however you want it
No
on
colors?
your
Where's the red one?
answer key. And you could just do a 5x5 and you could just make it 4 spaces. Yeah, just put one on
They're
each
just
side.
writing the word. Yeah.
So they're gonna
Come with a head.
Got purple.
Whatever's in your head.
All the colors are green. Black.
I guess it's putting on these and then putting them in the box. So take the B, put the B here. I missed this whole,
Oh, there.
next week. He's gonna start school, so I don't really know that we're gonna get around to too much of this. He's gonna be so exhausted that he is not gonna wanna come home and do any of this. Careful with that one, buddy.
It'll take a little while.
Yeah, well,
Is he
we've been
okay if
working
he
on-
started with the Caesars and then
We've been working on a lot of phonics. Sounds.
Yeah.
Because, well, he was at Sunlight, and I was telling her they were
And we
doing
weren't trying to
sign
keep
words
the
at end of
food
week.
from the kids. We were just trying to make it like
And
simple.
he was getting, I think, a little discouraged because
They're gonna
all
have
the kids were
grapes
writing
and
all their
pretzels
letters.
like a treat.
He's
not as
he
fun.
just turned 5 2 weeks ago, so he's a younger one. But
Yeah.
all these kids are doing sign words, and he's still trying to figure out the letters. Like he doesn't know if you read a K, what his
One of those
K
days,
is.
yeah.
So,
Oh,
well, when she was talking earlier,
actually
and
get
she
a
was
little
like,
something done.
they got to know the phonics first.
I'm sorry,
You
Charlotte.
can't just teach the
No,
sign
that's
word.
okay.
He doesn't even know the phonics. So, yeah, but she was really pushing. His teacher last year was pushing a
Did
lot
you
of sight
fall?
words, and I'm like,
I'm so sorry.
he's not gonna get these sight words, but he doesn't know his ABCs. Well, we were finding that he was getting very discouraged.
Would you
He
like
was
some
saying he
ice?
couldn't do things because all the other kids at his table could do it.
Would you like some ice?
Well, yeah. Well, then we were
Would you like
finding
a
out that
Band-Aid?
the other kids were doing his work. Like if she
Would you like
gave
your
him
mom
this
to
to sit down
kiss
and
it?
do in the morning, I would come home and like, Julie,
Do you want a paper towel with water on
and
it?
it would be like a vase. He would have like boom. And I said, well, how did you do this in class? Oh, Jacqueline did it for me. The other kids were doing the classwork. Yeah. So that became an issue.
He has said no to all home remedies for his boo-boo, but
He's fine.
he should be fine.
Neither of my kids do Band-Aids.
Well, I said, would you like some ice? No. Would you like a wet paper towel? No. Would you like your mom to kiss it? No.
No, that's his favorite word. That's his favorite word. It's you. He just turned 2 last week.
And then, yeah, you'll avoid no.
Yeah. Well, I tried not to say like no to everything. I'm trying to stop that.
Right.
Come on, let's go color.
Here's this.
Come on. No, Maverick.
You can have more of all these things. That's why we were taking the break so people could get stuff to work on if you want to start cutting and coloring while you. Is it okay? Are you guys surviving? You don't have as many kids out there, do you? Come on. It says almost 11 already. Okay, I was not keeping track of the time. It's almost 11. They are just now starting their craft. So I want us to have like just a little closing time outside with a little raffle in a few minutes anyway. But I do have a lot more things to talk about. I'm going to touch on some highlights for about 10 minutes. And then we will go out that way, join the kids, and have a little closing comment. So, to build the importance of reading, kids need to see you reading, okay? And yes, technically we talked about reading Facebook statuses is reading.
cell phone counts?
But earlier when I was telling you about helping kids make those connections, that word metacognition, them being aware of their own learning, for a small child, a phone is not a reading device yet, okay? A book is a reading device when they're 3. So because of that, they need to see you poring over a cookbook. They need to see you looking at a magazine, so real print. I know that ebooks are really accessible and they're great, but for the purpose of modeling reading to a child, please pull out real print and have them see you read it. Sometimes our tendency is to tidy up and keep our books on our nightstand and out of sight of the kids. Find a way to make books visible in the main part of the house, whether that means on a coffee table or if that's on a side shelf or whatever. Make sure kids can see that books are accessible in your home. Don't have them all just out in a closed-off cupboard. Remember that reading is important by modeling the reading of street signs, things at the grocery store, reading people's shirts, reading the cereal box. And anytime you can go to the local library, that's free. So books that you can check out and return is money you get to keep for something else. So you don't always just have to buy the books and keep them at home forever. Audiobooks are also available through the library. And listening to an audiobook is also reading. It does not have to be something that you use in a real book format. And audiobooks are amazing in the car, especially on long trips. You can ask your public library how to download audiobooks for free, and you get to keep them for 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah? No, go to the public library to ask for more information. I'm not sure exactly. Yeah, I think each library system uses a different software for that, and there's usually an app that they'll teach you how to download if you go there. You have to have a library card, usually, to get on their website. All right, anytime that a library or a bookstore has a book signing with a famous author, times when kids can become aware that books are not just presented in existence magically is a great connection for them, that books were written by somebody, because as they learn how to write, they can know that they can make a book and they can be an author too. Helping them to foster a love of reading, try your very darndest to read 1 book a day with your young kids. Most people find it's easiest to read it right before going to sleep, just because that's kind of a nightly routine. Finish your teeth, read a book, do a devotion, or say a prayer, and all that's kind of tied into your nighttime ritual. But also developing a sense of wonder for your child, making sure they understand that if you don't know something or you want to know more about something, that you can research it, you can look it up. Helping them understand that computers and tablets and phones are a wealth of information is important to them, that they're not just used for videos and games. And making sure that you build this love of reading early on will help them to continue to love it later in life. I mean, it's not a guarantee, but it certainly isn't going to work in the opposite direction. That if they hate reading when they're 6, they're probably still going to really hate it when they're 14. But if they love it when they're 6, they're likely to still enjoy it later on. Some other ways to show that reading is important and for them to feel that there's value in books is by making books special, by giving books as presents. Whether that means you get the fancy, fun kinds of books, if you know they like Diary of a Wimpy Kid, you get a special box set where some of them have covers that are like shiny, or if that means that you find at the new year and you buy the Guinness Book of World Records book for kids where it explains all of those record-setting people, those kinds of books where it's not necessarily a story straight through, but instead each page stands alone. Barnes & Noble puts out a lot of books like that where each page is a different topic. Like one page is about a castle, and then the next page is about a knight, and then the next page is about a princess or whatever. So those kinds of gift books, if you can start being that mom and giving books as gifts to other people's children too, and your kid starts to pick out those books and help you choose those books, then they're seeing that books are worth being treasured as a gift. Swapping books with friends has a twofold benefit. One, you don't have to buy as many of them because you can trade. The other thing is you can get together with those friends and have a book club or a book discussion, because now you've just had a shared experience of reading the same stories. If those stories have movies or shows that are attached to them, now you have something else to connect it to.
Don't touch me.
You can even make a book club with some of your friends or neighbors where everybody reads the same book and then you talk about it. The great thing about talking about books is that books give us a lens into other parts of the world. Books give us a lens into our own lives so that we can tie the information presented on the page to real life decisions we might need to make in life. And talking about how other characters handle situations is this indirect way of helping us guide our children in their morals and their ethics as well. Well, it seems like that girl was a little bit selfish when she did that. And now you're not attacking your own child's character, but you're explaining how someone in the story did something that maybe you would prefer your child not do, and you can use those as teaching moments without it being to the embarrassment of your child to say, well, you were dishonest yesterday like little Susie in the book. You wouldn't do that. But instead, you can indirectly explain how little Susie was being dishonest or selfish or whatever in that story, and that helps them understand a little bit more of their own ethics and their own morals. If your child is not interested, especially if they're 2, some of you were asking, like, he's 2, is he ready for this? And now I'll tell you what he's not ready for. He's not ready for you to force him to have story time. If story time doesn't happen, or story time is 2 minutes where you just look at the cover, that's story time. That's okay. As part of pre-reading development, what I mean by this is if you have a kid who is not yet ready to read real words, point out when reading is needed. I need to read this sign. Yesterday we talked about talking through processes. That's okay. It sounds awkward. Get over it. I'm going to read the label on this Campbell's soup. I'm going to this. I'm going to that. If they see that you are actually being an active reader on a daily basis, then they'll just at least start noticing that reading is valuable. They are going to start picking up on my husband's sister when she was 2. She asked the grandparents, can we go to Jingles? And they had no idea what she was talking about, but she was reading the Taco Bell sign, and it was a bell, so she thought it was Jingles. And so they start to be aware of some of that. They recognize craft. They recognize
the big M.
They recognize the big M. They recognize the label for craft, that it's on a lot of your products that you buy, maybe.
I thought they should want a Happy Meal. I never called it a Happy Meal. She never said it.
Huh.
How did it tell?
Maybe so. And then you also want to just keep talking to them, because the more you talk to them, the more they hear from you, the more of that foundation they're going to have to read. It's okay if they pretend to read. They're moving their finger left to right. They're turning the book open and closed. That's reading too. And beginning to help them understand the difference in letters and numbers is something you can do as a pre-reading skill as well. That's great. For pre-writing, remember, oral storytelling is writing. They may not be putting it to print. You are putting it to print. Let's say you write it while they speak it, and then they illustrate it, and you've just made a family book. You can look at books or pictures in magazines to have inspiration for some of these conversations where you can talk about what you see, and then you can write about it. You can also retell familiar stories or make up your own. Here's a good one if your kids are starting to learn to write their letters. Find ways that are unconventional to write the letters. Put out a plate of sand or rice, or put shaving cream on the table and have them write with their fingers. Makes it more tactile, makes it feel less like a school skill, but they're still learning the shape and the formation of the letters. Having a set of fridge magnets with the alphabet and the numbers is very important. Them copying text from books and magazines, even if they have no clue what they're writing, is still really important. Even if they trace the letters, that's really important too. If your child, listen, these are the last couple that are so important, okay? Backwards letters are okay. Backwards letters are okay, all right? Let me just tell you, what is this? What is this? It's a chair. What if I do this? What is it? It's a chair. He doesn't know that position matters. It's still a chair when it's on its side. But a B and a D is the same thing if you know that this is a chair, okay? Position never mattered until you taught them letters. Keep that in mind. Use that empathy when you get frustrated that they can't tell the difference between a P and a Q and a B and a D. Don't worry about it, okay? They'll get it eventually, but the main thing is that a chair is a chair no matter how you turn it. So if they're writing an S backwards right now, don't scream for the hills that they're dyslexic. It'll work itself out, or they're dyslexic. We don't know right now, but we don't have to worry about it today. Okay, I'm not saying they're not, but if they're writing a letter backwards for a while, that doesn't automatically mean that they're never going to learn to write it correctly. Do we do things right the first time? Not usually. If they get their uppercase and lowercase all mixed up in their words, that's okay. I told you don't do it. But for them to do it in the beginning, that's fine too. And in order to help kids when they're writing later on in life is making sure they know that writing is relevant. We can make writing relevant by making lists, by writing advertisements, by sending letters to people in the hospital. If kids know that writing is important and knowing correct grammar and spelling is beneficial for the recipient of that information, that's how they begin to buy in to wanting to be better at writing.
Your own cards, birthday cards.
Yes, exactly. Instead of buying them at the store, you can just use blank paper and practice writing them. Now, another thing, you can check with your child's teacher to find out more about how they teach the writing process at your school. So first you start with brainstorming, thinking of ideas. Then you write your first draft, then you revise it, you make it better, and then you write your final draft. If kids are struggling with reading, remember it's a team approach. You are not against your child, you're for your child. Make sure your child knows that. That's why it's important to be persistent, but don't feel like you can just fix your child. Just keep at it, just keep trying. Introduce new books, give them choices. Make sure that if the book is too easy, you don't panic. Give them confidence. The confidence is more important than the accuracy when they are struggling to read on level with their peers. Now, I was talking earlier that I wouldn't necessarily give these same pieces of advice to every teacher. I'm talking to you as a parent. The teachers need to panic. The teachers need to help the kids understand how to read better. You can help them, but the most important thing for you is that heart and the passion for it. So focus on that by reading together, watching movies that have to do with the books. And finally, here are some resources. So Wonderopolis is kind of like this Wikipedia blog thing that helps kids and families. And also Family Time Machine is a website where you can go and explore all sorts of topics. You can just like not Google, it's a search. You search the word like butterflies and you can see all kinds of articles that have supplementary pictures, graphs, videos, experiments, activities to do with them. So you just type in words that your kid's interested in and you can just go on a, what do we call it, like a YouTube black hole? I mean, you can have a Family Time Machine black hole of just searching for all sorts of interesting topics inside there. And then I'm going to send you more of an annotated list of websites that are very helpful because then you have like all the links. And also I found a resource for kids in grades K through 5 where based on their interest in a certain topic, it lists out stories that you can go and find to read that are related to that topic. Starfall.com is free on their website, and I think the app costs money, maybe like $2.99 or something. But they have all sorts of levels. They have very early with sounds and things that are not related to letters yet. They have things related to letters combined with sounds. They have math. They have early reading of short words, and they have reading of sentences and on into big paragraphs and stuff. So that's a program that builds and gets harder as kids get older, and it's pretty interactive and kind of fun. So, thank you very much. We were very rushed, I feel like. There was a lot to talk about, not a lot of discussion today, but you guys all asked some really great questions, and I'm so thankful for this opportunity. I'll email you all the stuff, and I'm also going to email you with a survey for ideas of how to make this better or different topics to have in the future. And also finding out if you know other people that if we did these two exact same basic contents that you could, recommend to come that, you wouldn't come again because you've heard it, but you could. But other people. So anyhow, if we can just head out into the fellowship hall for a minute, we'll do a little prayer with our kids, and then you can come back in here. You don't have to take them away right